Roland Zencore sound engine feels like it was made for synthwave. So today I'm putting the MC-707 through its paces to make some John Carpenter-inspired synthwave tracks. Bunch of sound design from scratch going on in here, and some presets as well. So let's just jump into it. All right, we've got 2 beats to get through, so let's start off with the first one, which uses a bit more custom sound design. A lot of it is fairly simple, but is hopefully pretty effective. So let's start off with the bass, because this is the main element that is the foundation of the track. So I'm going to hit Shift Edit to get into the guts of the synthesizer. And also right off the bat, you'll notice how the bass patch responds a little bit differently depending on how you press down on it or let it go. Gives you a little bit of variation built in as it goes along its bass line. This bass patch was started from an initialized tone, nothing too crazy going on in control. I've got the portamento turned up a little bit. I've got it set to mono, and I should mention, surprisingly enough, I actually didn't dial up the analog feel on any of the patches in this beat. But what it does is add some artificial pitch drifting that mimics the sound of an analog synthesizer. It's deliberately imperfect, and you'll see that a bit more in the second jam, and can go a long way towards some mimicking of more classic synths. But for this one, a stock virtual analog saw oscillator, super straightforward, and a super saw with a little bit of detune. You're going to see this over and over. I really like adding super saws as a layer on these patches because it adds a bit of extra width and fills a sound out quite nicely. That's it for the oscillators. And then of course a high cut filter, aka a low pass filter, the cutoff turned way down, the envelope depth turned way up, and the resonance turned up a bit. So let me show you what effect that has. And hold down Shift and twiddle a knob to get a more extreme effect. See, that goes a little too hard into the pew pew territory, so I just adjusted it to taste. Close enough. It's also set to ring out a bit. This is the amp envelope. So I can hit a note and it'll ring out a bit. Let me turn off the effect. This is the hexachorus, which really goes a long way towards giving it its sound. And I use this effect all the time. I probably overuse it a bit. And for the curious, here are my envelope settings. Slightly lower decay, middling sustain, and high-ish release. And that's how you get your pew pew. Super simple. Up next, this saw lead pad thing. You'll notice that this is set to be polyphonic, so the notes will bleed into each other a bit, which is always a nice sound. No portamento in this case. And let me just show you what analog feel would give you in this case. Here's none. Here's a little bit. Here's probably too much. And here's way too much. In this case, I didn't end up using it though. So we've got a Juno virtual analog oscillator. Here are my pulse width settings. A super saw, again. And that's it. And even though this patch sounds fairly static, I do have some envelope movement going on to control a high cut filter once again. So if I turn that up, you can hear how it sounds a little more harsh and tinny. You'll also hear that phase cancellation going on between the two oscillators. This kind of helps tame that. Envelope depth up quite high, and then here are my filter envelope settings. And once again, a middling release and a slightly slower attack. For effects, I'm using the Juno chorus, which goes a long way towards giving it that Juno sound. And of course, the noise is turned all the way down because who wants that? I should also mention that both of these patches are sent to the reverb and delay. And you can hear the ping-ponging delay on the bass especially. We've also got this bass layer. Doubling up that main bass line. So the effect is actually the thing doing most of the heavy lifting, so let me turn that off. Turn it on. This is the rotary effect. Adds that stereo width and some mid-rangey grit. For oscillators, a sub-oscillator wave, another super saw, shocker, and that's it. You're sensing a trend here probably. Cutoff turned down quite a bit for the low-pass filter. Very subtle little movement there. Resonance turned up a bit as well. I'm just holding notes down. And I've also got quite a bit of EQ going on in this case. Intentionally taming the sound and making it a bit more muted to fit into the mix. And finally, this is just a preset. Which is real nice. And altogether, you get a decently full track out of fairly simple components, as is the case for quite a lot of synthwave. I try to keep this fairly retro in its conception, and hopefully that carries through. And then once I was done with the main structure of this track, I recorded the individual tracks into my DAW and mixed them and arranged them, which is available on my mini EP Neon Gargoyle on all streaming services and Bandcamp. But let's move on to the second beat. This one really channels John Carpenter. And like I mentioned earlier, this relies a bit less on sound design from scratch and a bit more on presets, but will still hopefully be useful. These drums are all built-in samples. Which is fun. Something a little more vintage, which the built-in stuff works pretty well for. Short and punchy. Up next, the main star of the track, the bass. Which is a modified preset. So the patch that served as the starting point is called Hugo Bass. Let me select that. So you can hear the oscillators in action here, but the filter is not nearly what it ends up being, and the processing is also pretty different. Versus... And in my mind, that really brings the sound to life. So here's my version of this patch. Let me turn off the chorus. Once again, the hexachorus. Turn it back on. That goes a long way. So a bunch of oscillators all layered together, some Jupiter stuff. That's from the original patch, pretty much untouched. A little bit of analog feel going on in here as well. And the big thing, of course, is the filter. So another low-pass filter with the resonance turned up a good bit. So once again, this filter is set to start off open and then close fairly quickly. Hence that sound. So here's with the filter turned off. Just kind of this big chunky mess of oscillators. And then here's with the low pass filter turned on. Turn the resonance down. Turn it back up. It's a pretty simple sound, but it's how you get that bass. And in my mind, pretty damn effective. No EQ in this case. And building from that basis, we do have quite a few presets in action here. This is Analog Key W, is the name of the patch. Which is this lovely, shimmery, thin-sounding patch, in a good way. You hear that little bit of analog feel on there as well. That's dialed up to 22. This is Love Lead, which, yeah, I love it. This fills a nice place in the frequency spectrum between that really high lead and the really low bass. This is the 106 strings patch, which I've used before in previous tracks. Super simple. Just there to fill out the whole track. And you'll notice if I only used these 4 core tracks, I probably could have made this on the MC-101, this thing's little sibling. Even the sound design modifications I did are at least mostly doable on the MC-101. I don't think I could have tweaked the envelope movement, if I recall correctly, but I could have gotten fairly close, but just having deep access to the sound design is the reason that this track even exists, because the bass is the thing that kicked this thing off in the first place. So once I had tweaked that patch in the way that I did, it inspired the idea for the bass line, which then inspired me to keep building. Once again, I recorded the individual tracks via USB, mixed and arranged it in post, and this is also on the Neon Gargoyle EP. If you'd like to see my review of the MC-707, you can click or tap up over here. And if you'd like to see some synthwave production on the MC-101, its little sibling, you can click or tap up over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.